my honor to introduce to you the author of the book, The Little Pink House, Jeff Benedict. Jeff is a best-selling author who has written a number of books, some of which we're not familiar with until today. And one of the cool things about Jeff is that he's a good person to read if you want to get rich or richer. His current book that he is just about to release is a book called How to Build a Business Warren Buffett Would Buy. And it's about a business that started in 1954 with one pickup truck and is now worth $1 billion. He has also, 2 years ago, published the book, The Mormon Way of Doing Business, How 8 Western Boys Reached the Top of Corporate America. Also, he has written extensively on sports, and his 1998 book is really has an intriguing title. It is Pros and Cons, The Criminals Who Play in the NFL. That sounds very, very intriguing to me. The format for today's presentation is that Jeff is going to talk about his book, The Little Pink House. I'm going to come up and briefly comment on the issue from the Arizona perspective, and then we're going to turn it over for questions and answers. And last but definitely not least, Jeff will be signing books across the hall, and I hope that you will take the opportunity to read this delightful book. I always love a book in which the hero is a constitutional lawyer. Not nearly enough of those. I give you, and welcome to the Valley of the Sun, Jeff Benedict.
Thanks for that very generous introduction, and I want to thank the Institute for having me here, and I'm particularly impressed by the number of young people that are here. When I was standing out here waiting to come in, I saw teenagers coming in here, and I even saw a couple of people here who were younger than teenagers. And I like to see that. I think that's probably a tribute to what happens here at Goldwater, and it's great to see you. And I was also impressed with some of the interns here that I've had some exposure to earlier today. It reminded me of when I was an intern in graduate school and before I started law school. And some of the best experiences in my career happened at that time, and that in fact has a lot to do with why I'm a writer today. I'm an accidental journalist. I went to graduate school and law school to become a lawyer, and I never intended to be a writer. In fact, I've never taken a writing class, and I've never taken a journalism course, and I didn't work for a newspaper or a magazine before I started writing books, which is more of the traditional track to do what I do. But I got into this because when I was a graduate student, I worked on an issue as a graduate student on violence against women. I got pretty passionate about it. I realized it was something that not many men were speaking about or writing about. And so, being totally naive, I decided to write a book about what I had learned on violence against women. And then I went out and got it published, and it woke me up to the publishing industry, and I found out I loved to write. And in my first year of law school, I was invited to sign a commercial book contract with Time Warner Books. I thought it was crazy. I said yes in my first month of law school. I signed the contract, and my new editor at Time Warner Books called me up and scared the daylights out of me. Said, this was in October, and he said, this is what we expect, and he laid out all these things, and he said, and we want the manuscript delivered and finished by May, which was when the first year of law school ended. And he was paying me what we thought was an enormous sum of money at that time, because we were as poor as church mice. And my wife and I said, let's jump, and we did, and it turned into be my career. I finished law school, but didn't practice law. I've been doing this ever since, and I love what I do. And basically what I do is I look for stories that affect lots of people, that have great characters, and then have an issue that resonates with common folks. That's not easy to do. It's hard to find those kind of stories, but Little Pink House is one of those kinds of stories. I knew the ending of this story before I started. We all do. The end of the story is that in 2005, the Supreme Court voted 5-4 London had the power and the right under the Constitution to take private homes from citizens in New London and turn them over to a private developer on the justification that it was going to generate more tax revenue and create jobs. This is not a public use, it's a public benefit. And this decision equates public benefits with public uses. It changed the rules forever. That's why Sandra Day O'Connor wrote that the only thing we remember about this case, which is the dissent, and this shot across the bow, this warning, and the last thing that she wrote from the bench, which may be one of the things we remember her most for 20, 30 years from now. And she basically said what we did here today was wrong. And we've now created a situation where every farm can be replaced by a factory, every house by a mall. It's a dangerous precedent, and nobody knows where the boundaries are. That's the end. And to be honest, if I went to that with my publisher, they'd say, who cares? We've all read that. We all know that. We need something different. And besides, that doesn't sustain 350 pages, and it doesn't justify $27. And that's the way it works. And so here's what I did. I decided to go back and figure out this question. How does a dispute in a little tiny neighborhood that really is 2 blocks of houses escalate into a federal case? How does that happen? Because there's disputes like that all over the country. They're everywhere. So why did this one get to the Supreme Court and become the basis for what is now a law? And so here's what I found. I went back and I looked to 1997 when this all started. In 1997, there was a woman named Suzette Kelo. We all know who Suzette is now because of Kelo versus New London. Nobody knew Suzette in 1997. She was in her early 40s. She was in the last stages of her second failed marriage. She'd raised 5 sons, the 5th of which was about to graduate from high school and move out. She's ready for a new start. And she goes, and she's a paramedic, and one day on a paramedic run, she drives by this house and sees it, and she says to the other guy who's driving with her, look at that house. And he looks at the house and he goes, yeah, wow. She says, I'd like to buy that house. Are you crazy? The house is ugly. The house has no yard. It doesn't even have a driveway. It's obscured by briars and prickers and bushes. It's got a dilapidated for sale sign that looks like it's been hanging there for 5 years. Why would you want to buy that house? Good question. Same question might be asked, what would motivate a woman to hang on for 8 years and fight City Hall for a house? Well, what I was told is, because she's a greedy woman. She's greedy. And if you hold out long enough, you get more money. And that's why she did this, Mr. Benedict. And so I wondered, was she greedy? And the first time I showed up at her house and knocked on her door to meet her and see if I could persuade her to let me in, I had this great pitch prepared. I mean, I have to win her over the first time. So I thought really hard and long about what I was going to say. And I got to the house. I drove to her house, cold. She's never met me in her life. That's what I do. And I knocked on the door. And she opened the door. She was home. And I said, hi, my name is Jeff Benedict, and I'm a writer. And I got about that far, and she, totally rude, interrupted me and said, I know who you are. Which was kind of set me off. And she said, what took you so long? She did. She kind of hammered me. And I was in. It was the easiest in I've ever had as a journalist. I was in. I was in the house. And 3 hours later, I was still in the house. I sat at her kitchen table for 3 hours and I interviewed her. And what I was doing that day was trying to figure out, does this woman have what it takes for me to write a whole book? Can I use her as a vehicle to create a narrative that will hold people's attention and allow me a platform to delve into what are the larger issues at play here on eminent domain and the Supreme Court decision and everything that happened? Can she deliver that? And at the end of 3 hours, I was convinced she could. And so then I said, you've let me in your house. That was kind of easy. The question now is, will you let me in your life? Because I don't want to interview you one time like a newspaper reporter. I'd like to interview you probably 30 or 40 times. And I want to ask you things you've probably never been asked, and probably some things you probably never want to answer. Because in order to do the book, I need to know everything. And that doesn't mean I need to write everything, but I need to know everything to write your story. Because you're going to be the star of the story, because you're the Kilo person in London. And she agreed. I don't think she knew what she was agreeing to, but she said yes. And off we went. And I learned some fascinating things about her. And I talked to the real estate agent who sold her this house. And I'm thinking, is she greedy? And here's what the real estate agent told me the first time I interviewed him. He said, I have to admit, I've never sold a house because I just got my license. I was brand new. I mean, literally brand new. And I'm in the office on the weekend because no one else wanted to be there. And the phone rang. And a woman introduced herself and said she wanted to see this house on 8 East Street in London. And he said, I didn't even know where that was. I get the listing sheet out, and when I looked at it, I said, holy mackerel, this is a disaster. And he got back on the phone, when would you like to see it? And she said, today. And he said, well, let me get you some directions. She said, well, I'm in front of the house right now. Oh, I'll be right over. And he said, I got over there, and this is where I think journalism is not good today. There's a lot of times in journalism we don't listen to the people we're interviewing. We miss things that are important, and this is what he said to me. He said, when I got to the house to show her the house, I noticed that she had some blood spots on the tops of her feet. And I said, oh, that's weird. I said, what was that about? And he said, well, she was wearing sandals. It was a hot day. And when she got there, the house was covered up with briars and all this stuff. No one had been in the house in a long time. She brought hedge clippers. And she cut her way to the door, waiting for me to get there. And he said, when I pointed out to her that she cut up her feet, he said, it went right over her head like it didn't even faze her. And of course I thought, greedy? Doesn't sound like greedy. Got in the house, and then he said, I got in the house and I was embarrassed at what I saw. The house was a wreck. And he said, I immediately started pointing out things that she might want to consider before maybe we should look at some other properties. He said, but I couldn't get her away from the picture window. He said, because as soon as we entered the house, she parted these curtains that looked like they hadn't been open in a long time. They were dingy and gray and dark. But when she opened the window, the curtains, the room filled up with light. And there was this terrific view of Long Island Sound. And she just stood there, and stood there, and stood there. And he said, without leaving that spot, she made an offer. And I thought, this doesn't sound like a woman that's greedy. This sounds like a woman who's hungry. This is a woman who wants this place really bad for some reason. What's the reason? Well, the reason is because when she was a little girl, her dad left her, didn't even leave her a name. Didn't even leave her a name. She doesn't know her dad's name. Her mom is a waitress in Maine, making nothing. Leaving her at home alone with her brothers to be raised, doing things like making hot water and putting chocolate in it for breakfast, wearing socks for mittens. Can you imagine that in the dead of winter in Maine? This is how she grew up. Pregnant at 16, by age 25 had 5 children. You get the picture. This is not a woman who had a lot of opportunity. Didn't get to go to school. Didn't get to have a job. Because she raised her 5 sons and did a good job. And she had 2 husbands who she had to take care of just as much as her kids. And the second one liked the bottle more than her. And so by the time she's in her mid-40s, and she's raised these kids and been through these divorces, she would like to maybe have something for herself in life. And for the first time in her life, she owns something. It's a house on the water in a neighborhood that most people didn't even know existed, but it was the one place she could afford it. And she got it for a little over $50,000, which isn't very much. She scraped it up. First-time home buyer, got a loan, borrowed $2,000 from her friends for the down payment, and got the seller that was desperate to get out from under this disaster to agree to paint the house. And she demanded it be painted pink. that's someone who's hungry, not greedy. And she gets in, and she's barely in, and then, it's not me now, I'm years away. It's a real estate agent. We'd like to auction your house. Oh, I just got here. I'm not really interested in selling. Yeah, but Pfizer is coming next door. They're coming to town. They're building a big global headquarters right here. And all this land has to be acquired. Well, I told you I'm not interested. Close the door. 2 weeks later, it's the same agent. This time she's offering a little bit more for the option. Suzette says, I told you last time I'm not interested in selling. But nothing. Get off my property. And if you come back, I'll throw you off. The agent leaves. I like her already. Then she gets a letter in the mail. This letter comes from the development agency that's heading the project up. And it doesn't say, if you sell. It says, we'd like to make your move as convenient as possible. And she's barely in the house. She's barely moved in. Okay, that's the beginning of the story from Suzette's perspective. Now here's the other side. At the same time that Suzette is finding this house and buying this house and moving into this house, in Hartford, Connecticut, our governor is John Rowland, who was immensely popular. And what was ironic is that Connecticut is a very democratic state. It's a very liberal state. It's my state. I know. It's liberal. And here's this Republican governor who is cleaning house in every election. Overwhelmingly popular. Why is this happening? He's charismatic. He's smart. He works hard. He's handsome. He has all the gifts of a good politician. And he's doing things that people in Connecticut like. But you know what he doesn't like? He doesn't like New London. Because New London beats the tar out of him all the time because it's the most democratic city in the state. They don't just beat him, they beat him bad. And so now he's won 2 terms and he's going for number 3, and he's being talked about as a potential cabinet member in the Bush administration. And boy, he is going to do it in New London next time. And he's going to send a whole bunch of money in there and do this great urban renewal plan on the waterfront. It's a good idea. But he doesn't want to deal with City Hall, which is Democratic controlled, and the guys can't get out of their own way, and they don't like the governor. So he has his right-hand man figure out how to do this. They hire a lobbyist. Nobody's very creative anymore. Just go get the lobbyist. He'll figure out how to do it. And they hire Mr. Democrat. This was smart. He's the former mayor of New London. He's a lawyer, and he is totally plugged in. And he comes to the governor after they pay him $200,000 with a plan. And here's the plan. The plan is simple. We're going to use an old development agency that used to be in New London called the New London Development Corporation. We chartered this thing back in the 70s when I was involved in local politics. It's still on the books, but it's not active. We can reactivate it by just filing some paperwork. And that development agency would have the power to do the development basically from Hartford, meaning the governor's office can control and steer the project right around City Hall. You just have to give them money. And then you can run the project yourself. Certainly more efficient and effective. The governor liked the idea, but who are we going to get to run this thing? Obviously, we can't run it. No, and I have an idea for that too. We're going to get a very charismatic woman who's new to New London, and she is the president of Connecticut College, the most prestigious institution in the city. Her name is Claire Gaudiani, and Claire has a Rolodex to die for. And she's raised more money for Connecticut colleges and endowment in the history of the school. She is a woman who knows how to get things done. And she's trusted by the city officials in New London. Everybody loves her. She's the new flavor. So they interview her. The governor likes her. She gets the position. So she's now the president of Connecticut College and the president of the New London Development Corporation. And she says, in order for this to work, we need a linchpin. We need a big Fortune 500 company to come into New London first. Because if we want to do something big and do it fast, which is what she's all about, speed and production, we need a big name company to sign on to our project. And if they say yes, it'll be a lot easier to get everybody else. It's kind of like if you're going to build a mall and you get Macy's to sign up. It's it's a lot easier to get all those other little stores to get on board. And she doesn't, she shoots for the sky. She shoots for Pfizer. Why Pfizer? Well, because Pfizer has a huge facility right across the river from New London, and they're out of space, and they're looking for land to expand. This is no secret. Everybody knew this. But they're certainly not looking in New London. In fact, they weren't even looking in Connecticut. They were looking all over the globe. Connecticut's not a cheap place to buy land. Claire calls up the president of Pfizer. How does she know him? He's on the board of trustees at Connecticut College. Her husband works for him at Pfizer. I told you she's connected. And she gets a meeting with him. And she goes in there and pitches him a softball. Maybe Pfizer would want to come and look at this waterfront property that's available, 24 acres right on Long Island Sound. No, we're not interested. We've already got our sites, and we've been working on this for over a year. We're down to 2 sites. We're certainly not looking at one. Okay, well, you know, I'm going to be the president of this new nonprofit development agency, and we're looking for other volunteers, and we really need someone who knows how to work with a Fortune 500 company, and I'd really like you to join the board. He is just about to get FDA approval to sell Viagra. Nobody in the world knows it. But he's sitting on this huge drug, and they are up to their eyeballs in it. He doesn't want to get involved in some volunteer nonprofit development corporation in New London. And he sort of says that. And she says, well, listen, I don't really have time to do this either, but we need to do this for the city. And there are other people who are very capable who are volunteering their time as well. He says, well, what's the commitment you're looking for? And she says, I've asked everybody for a year. And if we don't do something big in a year, we're going to close down shop and all go our own ways. He said, I'll give you 6 months. And she knows how to get things done. He showed up at the first board meeting, and they nominated him to be the chairman of the property acquisition. So he's got to go look at the property. She takes him over to the property. 24 acres they're marking on the waterfront, right next to Suzette's neighborhood. Right next door. It's 1 street over. A 24-acre parcel that used to be a linoleum factory. It's got all kinds of contaminants and pollutants in the ground. The city could give this property away. She's going to show it to them, because this is their showpiece. If they can get a big company to come there, then they can start moving down the waterfront. He comes to look at it, and the first thing he sees is it looks like a dump. Because nothing's been there for so long. It's got weeds taller than me. There's litter everywhere. There's a chain link fence that just looks terrible. You know what they look like. It's awful. And he says, you know, it really stinks down here, too. It smells like a toilet bowl. Well, that's because there's a sewer plant right behind it. And it's not tapped. Are you kidding me? No. And next to that is a junkyard. Scrap metal junkyard. There's about 2,000 rubber tires, cans of oil, metal everywhere. And then on the third side of this property, to just top it off, is an old fort that Benedict Arnold burned down in the Revolutionary War. I don't think anybody's touched it since. And he said, you think that we're going to be, I said, I don't think any Fortune 500 company in their right mind would come here. The environmental liability alone makes this very unattractive, never mind the stink and everything else that's around it. And here's Claire's genius. She says, well, what if we took all of the polluted dirt out of this 24-acre site and brought in clean dirt and totally remediated this site and made it so it was environmentally soundproof and paid for it with state money, and then gave it to a company at no charge. 24 acres on the waterfront, completely environmentally clean. How about that? What else? Well, what if with state money we bought the junkyard? Bought it, kicked them out, got rid of all the garbage, cleaned it up, and then turned that over to the company as well. It's attached, so now you have 2 parcels. And what if the state of Connecticut agreed to cap the sewer plant, modernize it, update it, clean it, and get rid of the stink? And what if the state would even use state money to turn that old fort into a state park, make it a tourist attraction with people coming from everywhere and getting all fired up to come to southeastern Connecticut and spending money. And what if they did all that? Well, if you did all that, maybe we have something to talk about. And within a month, the president of Pfizer was sitting in the governor's office. And there's 4 people in the room. The governor, his chief of staff, the president of Pfizer, and Claire. And they hammer out a deal. And the deal is all those things that I just told you, which the state says, we know what that's going to cost. And Pfizer wants one more thing. And if you can deliver this, we're in. Pfizer will build its global research and development headquarters in London, of all places. We would like to get 90 additional acres right next to that 24. 90 additional acres that right now has houses, industrial properties, and businesses, so it's multi-zoned. But we'd like all 90 acquired. Now, we don't want them from ourselves. Pfizer doesn't want to own this stuff. But we'd like the city to acquire it, raise it all, wipe it out, erase it. And then we want to build new things there. We want you to build new things there. And the new things we'd like there are the following. In fact, we got a little list here. At the top of the list is we'd like a 5-star hotel. There isn't one in the entire city. We'd like one right next to our facility. And if you'll do that, we'll guarantee 50% occupancy rate. The second thing is we'd like a health club and spa that our people could use, but also visiting scholars, doctors, physicians who come to Pfizer to do research. We'd like some upscale housing, the kind of housing that our employees might want to buy and live in. Certainly wouldn't want to live in the kind that we have there now. And last, we'd like some biomedical research space that's in this 90-acre footprint. It's all right on the water, right next to Pfizer. And the state says, we can deliver that. And they say, we will put up $75 million of state money, taxpayer money. And Pfizer says, we'll put up about $300 million of our own money to build our facility. That's what it's going to cost. The match is about $3 of private money by Pfizer for every dollar of public money from the state of Connecticut. And a couple weeks later, Claire and the president of Pfizer and the governor of Connecticut get on a boat right off the shore of London, where this ugly neighborhood is, and they make a grand announcement that they are coming to New London. New London's ship has come in, the newspapers reported the next day. It's huge news, and it's within 2 days of that Suzette got the knock from the realtor that I told you about. That's how this story starts. It's a wonderful, wonderful display of how people's lives collide. And this is a train wreck that starts with these deals that were made. And you know, if you think about these deals, they're not illegal. They may not even be immoral. They made a deal. Pfizer asked for things. That's what companies do. There's nothing wrong with asking. The state said yes to some things. Maybe there were some things they overpromised on, but now they're on the hook. They've signed a deal. There's actually a memorandum of understanding. There's a written document. It's got the governor's signature on it. Pfizer voted on this in a board of directors meeting in New York. So we now have we've got a binding agreement on the table, and they're going after it. And they want these properties. And this is a neighborhood. The industrial guys who own the old warehouses that have been empty for years, yeah, we love to sell. We're out of here. You want these dumpy things? You can have them. But the people who lived in the houses, different story. This is an old immigrant neighborhood. Mostly settled by Italians, been there 100 years. Never lived anywhere else, some of these folks. There were women and men in these houses who were in their 70s and 80s and 90s who were born in these houses. Born in the houses, not in a hospital. They haven't had a mortgage for 50 years. They don't owe anything on their home. Everybody knows everybody. Sally and Jim and Jack and Petey and Bob. And they got the local deli on the corner. Nobody locks their doors at night. They don't even lock their doors when they go away. It's the kind of neighborhood you just read about nowadays. But this was the neighborhood in 1997. You kind of understand why they don't want to sell their houses. Where is this 85-year-old woman going to go? Who's never lived anywhere else? Can you imagine how scared to death she'd be when somebody shows up and says, but you have to because Pfizer's coming. You got to get out. People panicked. Suzette didn't panic. She got rip roaring mad. And she called the mayor's office up and said, should I be concerned about this? And the mayor said, yeah, you
You should be really concerned. And he agrees to come over and meet with her because the mayor realizes what's going on. He doesn't like it. The control of the town is going to be torn right out from under the local leader. So the mayor goes over there. He's a great mayor. He's a brand new mayor. He's been in office 3 months and he inherits this. And he shows up at Suzette's house and he says, Suzette, Ms. Kilo, let me tell you what you need to do to save your house. The first thing you need to do is you need to organize a grassroots movement. And in order to do that, you need to set up a coalition, a neighborhood coalition. In fact, you need to go door to door and knock on every door in the neighborhood, and you need to get all these folks to join your little coalition. And you're going to take around petition forms on clipboards and get everybody to sign up. Name, address, phone number. Most of these people weren't happy to be held. They're afraid of being held. And they sign everything up. And then what you need to do is you need to bring all those petitions and your neighbors to City Hall. And you need to present this in a public meeting to the City Council and to me. And you need to tell us why you don't want to leave your homes. And then you need to start writing letters to the editor. They're going to be carefully written. They're going to be targeted. And you've got to contact your state legislator, get them on it. Just hold it. Wait a minute here. I just moved here. I don't even know anything in this neighborhood. You know what? You don't know what's been going on in my life, but I came here to be alone. Okay? I want to be alone, and I'm trying to start my life over here. I didn't come here to become, whatever this is, politically active or something. I don't even know how to do that. He looks at me. Do you want to keep your house? Well, yeah, of course I want to keep my house. Then you will go door to door, because it's the only way. And if you do, you will become the poster child for imminent doom. This is picture this, folks. This is in the spring of 1998. There's no lawsuit. There's no lawyers. There's nothing. Can you imagine that this mayor never dreamed that what he said was actually going to mean Suzette Kilo standing in front of the Supremes or outside the courthouse with a gallery of reporters from NBC, NPR, CBS, ABC, the New York Times, Boston Globe, saying, Ms. Kilo, what do you think the court's going to do? And she really does become the poster child for him. And this is how it all started. She went door to door. She formed the coalition. She didn't know what the hell she was doing. And there comes a point about 2 years later where some of the neighborhood is so scared of what's going to happen that they've sold. Some of the old people literally die. I mean, it's crazy what happens. And then the first time the bulldozers show up, a lot of people like Suzette still in their houses, no lawsuit yet. Nothing's happened yet except that some people have sold and the development agency has acquired the title of those properties. And because they have the title, those folks who won't go, I'll show you how to get these folks out of their houses. You bring a big bulldozer in and you knock down the house right next to your house. And if you live in a house that's right here, and the distance between that house and the next house is the walkway between these stairs, this is an urban neighborhood. We're not out in, the country where there's 500 yards between the houses. There's an alleyway between the houses. I told you there aren't yards. So if you knock this house down and you live in this house, it's pretty unbelievable to sit on your porch and see something that took a year to build come down in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And when it comes down, man, it comes down. There's glass flying everywhere, there's wood, there's bricks, and water going in every direction, coming in through your windows. And the first day the bulldozer showed up, the mayor drove through the neighborhood, saw the bulldozer, was furious because he didn't know that the permit had been issued. He gets out of his car with his wife. She's got her crocheting material. She sits down on the steps of the house and starts knitting, and he sits down next to her. And the guy operating the bulldozer, his name is Chico Barbieri. This is why non-fiction is better than fiction. John Grisham has nothing on Little Pink House, I'll tell you right now. Chico is a big guy. He's an Italian. They're all Italian. Chico's got his big arms, guns, bigger than my legs, cut off sleeves. He fits the part. He's driving the machine that's going to rip down the house. And now he's got this guy on the steps with rips out his cell phone and calls the police. I got a guy on the steps and he won't get off. So the police get in the cars and they drive down to the neighborhood. They don't know it's the mayor until they get there. You gotta be kidding me, it's the mayor. We work for this guy. They all know him, you know, so the police go up there and go, hey Lloyd, come on. You gotta get off the steps. No, I'm not coming off the steps. And neither is she. No, Lloyd, look, they got a program. It's legal. We have legal authority to do this. He said, I don't care if it's legal. It's not right. And we're not moving. Lloyd, if you don't come off the steps, we have to arrest you. Then arrest us. I mean, imagine all the neighbors watching this. We got somebody on our side. The police pull handcuffs out and they cuff the mayor. And they cuff his wife. And they pick him up and they carry him off the steps and throw him in the police car, drive him to jail, put him in a holding cell. They have to get a lawyer. It's unbelievable. And then in 2.5 minutes, Chico rips the house down. And then he rips the next one down. And he goes right down the street, got each one that they had the permit for. He gets to the last one that they had the permit for, and it's the one right next to the pink house. It's Suzette's neighbor's house. And these people had fled because they were scared they were going to get, they had no choice, and so they sold and got out. They didn't want to sell. And she comes out with a broom. And she's going to try and stop this, and it's obviously not happening. And finally, her friend and neighbor, this guy named Billy Von Winkle, is one of the best characters in the book. He finally gets her off the thing, off the porch. The guy, Chico, knocks the house down, does some damage to Suzette's house. She gets glass in her hair, her face, and everything else. And he puts her in the car and takes her to a bar and gets her drunk. And then he comes home and tucks her in the bed. She goes to sleep. And she wakes up in the morning, long over, looks out the window, and imagine, you look out the window and your neighbors' houses are gone. It's not the same neighborhood we had when you woke up the day before. And then there's a knock, and it's Chico. And Chico's standing there with a basket of scented soap. And he says, I'm sorry, and I promise I'll never knock your house down. And she brings Chico in, she gives him a cup of coffee, and Chico gives her a big hug. And when I interviewed Chico, who's this ultimate tough guy, tougher than Rocky. I mean, he is a true tough guy. And when Chico's talking to me, and I see the guy getting kind of emotional, I'm thinking Chico's probably never cried before. And he said, he said, I've been a demolition man for a long, long time. He said, I have knocked down a lot of things in my lifetime. He said, this was the worst job I've ever had in my life. I hated it. He said, you don't know what it was like to stand there and have to knock these houses down and know that there were people in the neighborhood who lived there forever. He said, I was just trying to do my job. He said, I was just on a contract. I'm trying to feed my family. This was my job. He said, this was terrible. And I never knocked Suzette's house down. It's a great story. Suzette fights the fight. She goes all the way to the Supreme Court. She's hired by the Institute for Justice, takes her case. It's a great nonprofit law firm in Washington, D.C., which our leader here, Clinton, used to be part of. And these guys, they're white knights who ride to the rescue. They don't want legal fees. They don't take legal fees. You can't give it to them if you want to. And they take the case. And they go to trial. And they win. It is a terrific trial. The trial judge rules for the landowners. And everybody is excited. The headline after the trial is eminently their domain. It's a wonderful headline. And it shows them toasting. Suzette and the neighbors. They won! And then there's an appeal. And the Connecticut State Supreme Court overturns the ruling 4-3. And that's because Connecticut has really tough eminent domain laws. And you can do this in Connecticut. So, Suzette's folks appealed to the United States Supreme Court. And nobody thought they'd take the case. And good old George Will wrote a devastating column that made the case for why they should take this one. Because this is, if this doesn't cry out for a Supreme Court ruling, I don't know what does. And they took the case and everybody thought, they're going to win. And they lost 5-4. And the news agencies were on Suzette's door within an hour after the decision was announced in Washington. What are you going to do now, Ms. Kilo? I ain't going anywhere. Mr. Von Winkle, what are you going to do? No, she ain't leaving. I'm not leaving either. And they all stayed. And a year later, they're still in the houses. And the governor, new governor, by the way, Governor Rowland's in prison at this point. company, the best drug they've had in 25 years, gone, out. Claire, the woman who brought this whole project to fruition and steamrolled the houses, Suzette's nemesis, unbelievable fall. 75% of the faculty at Connecticut College find out about this case. They're so mad they circulate a public petition demanding she be fired and she loses her job. It's unbelievable. You can't imagine that this stuff can happen. And you're standing there after all this, and who's left standing? Suzette and her neighbors in their few houses. But the governor, the new governor, says that we got a real mess on our hands, and she gives down an ultimatum. She says, we've set aside this much money to pay these people. It's way beyond what the houses are worth, and way beyond what the city offered them. And you have until May 31st to accept the money. And if you don't accept the money by May 31st, the money comes off the table, and it's gone, and you're left. It's you and New London. And New London has made it clear they'll come in there and tear you out of your houses because they want to get the project done. So most of them say we're going to take the money, and they do. Take the money, and they leave. So that's last. And Sean Hannity has it on satellite TV. It's the evening of May 31st. It's 8 o'clock Eastern time. Midnight's the deadline. And Sean says to her, she's standing in front of her pink house that got a light on it, what are you going to do, Miss Kilo? Well, I want to keep my house. I just want to keep my house. Well, we'll be watching. Lights out. It goes dark. Nobody can see her anymore. The only people left on the street are me, because I'm writing a book right now, and the two cameramen from Fox. And they unplug the lights, and the cameramen come across the street, and this is what's great. I mean, they come across the street, and they go, Miss Kilo, we are totally with you on this. It's an honor to be here to be interviewed, to be just operating cameras. We hope you win. And then they leave, and she gets up on the steps of her house, and she says, by now we're on the first name basis, she says, Jeff, what do you think I should do? And I said, you know, it's a little awkward because journalists don't advise people they're writing about. And I said, I can't really do that. I said, I'm just here to report what happens. And she said, yeah, but what do you think I should do? I said, well, I'll tell you what my gut is. My gut instinct is you're the last one, and the whole country's watching now. The governor does not have the backbone to watch you dragged out of your house on national television. And if you decide to batten down the hatches here, you can stay here as long as you want. On the other hand, if you do that, look what you have. All your friends are gone. All their houses are gone. The deli's gone. Look around. This neighborhood looks like Lebanon. There's nothing here. Do you want to stay here? And she went inside with her dad. And 2 months later, she signed a deal with the governor that said, as long as the pink house gets to stand and be saved and become a historical site, a symbol to the fight, put up on another property in New London, I'll go. And she goes. Pink House is there today. You can go hang out in it if you want to. The Institute for Justice paid for a lot of that. And they put up a monument. And there it is. And that's my alarm. Perfect timing. I'll end on that. Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure.
The Freedom Trail, where you have to do your pilgrimages, New London would be the destination. But I'd love to see that, just as I'd love to see the Freedom Hotel that Justice Souter owns up in New Hampshire. Just an incredible story, and just to add a postscript that is focused on Arizona. As Jeff knows, and as many as you know, this was not just about Suzette Kilo. This is about thousands of people who suffer from eminent domain abuse all over the country, including here in Arizona, and Jeff mentioned that I was with the Institute for Justice at the time, and as our courageous colleagues Scott Bullock and Dana Berliner were arguing Kelo up in the United States Supreme Court, my dear friend and colleague Tim Keller and I were arguing a case right here in Arizona on behalf of a guy who is as famous locally as Mrs. Kelo is nationally, and that's Randy Bailey. And as many of you know, Randy Bailey owns, I am happy to say, a brake shop at the corner of Country Club in Maine in the city of Mesa. And a hardware store owner coveted that land, and instead of going to Mr. Bailey and his neighbors, went to the city council and said, I would love to have that property so I can expand my hardware store. And the city council, always wanted to really have a tough deal, said, we will go ahead and take that property for you, but only if you also accept the $2 million subsidy from us. Lenhart knew when he was beaten, and he accepted that deal. We went to court, and there's something different that we had that our colleagues Dana and Scott did not have at their disposal, and that was a provision of the Arizona Constitution that says private property shall not be taken for private use. At the time we took that case, those words were not worth the paper they were written on. But because this case was so outrageous, because people were so upset, and because people recognized that if this could happen to Suzette Kelo, if this could happen to Randy Bailey, it could happen to them. Ultimately, we won that case in the Arizona Supreme Court. And that, in turn, set off a little revolution. The city of Mesa did away with eminent domain for economic development. The state legislature clamped it down, and then the people spoke. And by a resounding 2/3 margin, adopted the most sweeping private property rights protection in the entire nation, called Proposition 207, which stopped dead in its tracks the reverse Robin Hood scheme of taking private property from one person and giving it to a more politically connected person. And also stopping or requiring compensation for regulatory takings. And the battle, of course, never ends. Even when you have such a wonderful law, you have to keep going to court. And here at the Goldwater Institute, we have had 2 Proposition 207 lawsuits, one going on in Tucson right now, where an anti-demolition ordinance was passed to stop infill development in the university area. And we represent a small developer who tears down blighted houses, builds beautiful student housing. City Council absolutely found that intolerable, passed an anti-demolition ordinance that at the end of the process, if you dare to apply for a demolition permit, you have a right to demolish property in this neighborhood. The city gets to decide not only whether you get that permit, but whether they should acquire your property or not. So in order to apply for this permit, you have to subject yourself to the possibility that you will lose your property altogether. We think that is illegal. And many of you may have heard about the plight of the Luke Air Force Base property owners. And recently the county said, you can't do anything with your property. You can live there, but if your roof comes off in a storm, you can't rebuild it. If your fence comes down, you can't rebuild that. We had one, we ended up representing about 200 property owners there. And one of them is a disabled man who, in order to recover, needed to build a spa in his backyard. Sorry, you can't do that. And ultimately, with Prop 207's teeth, we filed nearly 200 claims for compensation. The county, we hear, is a little strapped for cash at the moment. And they said, okay, you know what, you guys can go ahead and use your private property rights. And that is the weapon that Prop 207 gives us. But it does require eternal vigilance. And I am happy to say that when people stand up for their rights, they do often prevail. In addition to Mrs. Kelo's house standing, you can still buy brakes that stop on a dime and Bailey's Brake Service in Mesa. And I'm going to finish with one of my favorite quotes, and poor Tim Keller has heard me say this so many times, he probably hears it in his sleep, but this whole saga reminds me of my favorite revolutionary, Tom Paine, who had far greater odds against him in his time, but he said this, and it is so true. He said, "Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, but we have this consolation. The harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph."